6:30. We will now call the meeting to order. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation during the regular meeting. Mrs. Petter, roll call.
Mrs. Whiter?
Here.
Mr. Simons?
Present.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Here.
Mrs. Moore?
Here.
Mrs. Kessler?
Here.
Thank you. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is approval and/or revision of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Whiter?
Yes, motion passes. Next is recognition of visitors, and we have one visitor, Bob May.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Bob Main was here last month at the regular meeting of the board talking about the withholding of a diploma for a gentleman, Marquise Elliott, as well as some systemic issues related to that. In discussions with the superintendent just before the meeting, it sounds like Mr. Elliott is being taken care of. There's just been a communication gap there that he has not heard from the district. But I do want to point out to this board, as the primary policy-making division or folks for the district, that there is one policy that we really need to address, and that's a finance policy regarding student fees and fines, etc. In that, it reads that a student shall not be allowed to participate in the sport or activity until their fees are paid. Now, obviously, in practice, that is not happening, thank goodness, but that policy in general kind of reeks of inequity for students that are economically disadvantaged, and I think really needs to be addressed for now and the future. So that's all I have for now. Hopefully, I will not be back on this subject. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Main. Mrs. Petter, is the consent agenda okay as a whole?
You get your motion and your second.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Whiter?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is district business. Approval of the fiscal year 2024 temporary appropriation resolution and certificate of estimated resources. Mrs. Petter, did you need to say anything about
I
that?
will. Do we have a motion or
Yeah.
a second?
Is there a motion?
Move to approve the FY '24 temporary appropriation resolution and certificate of estimated resources.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Now, Mrs. Petter.
Okay, this is the packet that's attached, and you also have a copy at your desk. This is a temporary. This allows us to conduct business in July, August, and through September until the final appropriation and certificate of estimated resources is approved prior to November or September 30th. And so this allows us to operate. You'll see it move a lot in these next 3 months as we get the budget finalized for fiscal year 24.
Anything else?
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland.
Yes.
Thank you, motion passes. Next is approval of transfers and advances.
Move to approve the transfers and advances.
Second?
It has been moved and seconded.
We have two standard transfers included. That is the $215,000 that we transfer from general fund into the athletic fund. Also the $175,000 that we transfer from general fund into the NJROTC fund. There are two other transfers. One is from one athletics fund into another athletics fund, and that was receipts from our Hall of Fame event. It was receipted as a part of the online receipts. We need to move that from the general ticketing line into the Hall of Fame fund. The other is an item that we had a negative balance on, and we have to do a transfer to cover that one, and that was from one class to another class. Those are the transfers.
Anything else?
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore.
Yes.
Thank you, motion passes. Next is approval of service agreement with, is it Casey's?
Move that we approve the service agreement with Cassia.
Cassia.
Second.
Put my glasses on.
It's all right. I have mine on and I still. Here, second?
I seconded it.
Second.
Okay.
Did we do D prior to
I'm
C?
confused, yeah. Did we skip something?
I
No?
had ABCD.
A, B, C, D, okay.
Starting doc's not in there.
Well, it's E on the printed, and there's no.
Did we do Premier
it's like
Custom
there's
Concepts?
Something missing.
I don't think
I
so.
It's numbered wrong, that's why I keep looking like, what are we doing?
That's all right.
I had a settlement agreement with Premier Custom Concepts. Did we do that?
I don't recall, but I'm not sure.
Let's see. Is that what we're doing? I thought you were doing Kaseya.
As a point of order, can we go ahead and do D and then come back to C?
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Second,
Mrs.
I don't know
Moore.
if we got a second on it.
Second.
Did you raise it?
She made,
Who did
Oh,
the
you-
motion?
she
okay.
made the motion.
Okay.
John did the motion.
Sorry.
John did the motion. I thought I seconded. Oh,
No,
well.
no, the point of order.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you had it right. He did the motion, I seconded, but the
Very
point
good.
of order, I did need.
Casey,
Are we okay?
All right.
Now we go back to C.
No,
D.
We haven't
no,
voted on it.
we need to dispose of,
D?
yes.
Okay, Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder.
Yes, thank you, motion
Now
passes.
we're back up.
And now, and again, I apologize, I put my glasses on, so I should be able to see these things. Approval of settlement agreement, Premier Custom Concepts.
I move to approve the settlement agreement with Premier Custom Concepts as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded.
Thank you, and there is discussion. So this goes back to the food truck. You remember, we tried to really be on the forefront of making sure that we are actually continue to take food to our beautiful community, the 6 communities that we serve. And so the Board of Education, rightfully so, we entered into a contract. Unfortunately, whether it was a company biting off too much that they could chew or just poor leadership or whatever the case was, but we had this, we thought we were well ahead of everybody else that was ordering all kinds of food trucks and parts and so forth. So since we were really on the front, and this is prior to COVID, right, Mr. Fricky? So this is prior to COVID, but then when COVID hit, think that this company then was able to maximize profits a little bit greater with charging more money than what they had entered into our contract. So we fought with them. It was myself, Chris Petter, our attorneys, Mr. Fricky, Ms. Sparks, and others really hit this company hard. So unfortunately, the reality of having a food truck a couple years ago did not happen. But this is a settlement agreement so that we could actually get at least the truck and try to put the parts in ourselves. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I can remember how hard food service worked on that because of where I sit during the day.
Yeah, there was great effort done. I mean, we went
A
back and forth with
tremendous
even design to make sure that we had everything. It was for a minimal food prep, but we could serve hot food from there, refrigerated food and so forth. And then unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition, but it will be over the next couple months.
Anything else?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes. Thank you. Next is academic update.
So this will be relatively brief because you remember around this time last year, we had preliminary results that came in. Now the Board of Education you will receive the preliminary results, but if you receive what we received, it's kind of difficult to go through, so we're putting some things together. So you'll receive them. A couple points to notice right now. Now again, because the data has not all been scrubbed. So let me give you an example of what that means. If we had a student that came in at a certain time of the year and they exited us and they went to another school district in Ohio, in the state, some other place that can be tracked, sometimes they don't get pulled out of our data right away. The same holds true depending upon when students come in. So that's why they say preliminary data, don't talk about it in great detail. The state actually says don't talk about it, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So there's a couple things that we feel that are really good preliminary results. One is it's been a long time since you met the achievement indicator. So it appears that we did that this year. So preliminarily, we got 3 stars, which again is meeting the achievement indicator, which again has been a long, long time, unfortunately, despite great effort. So there was a lot of positives with that. We saw some really great growth in other areas that, again, very, very excited about. But we need to, again, kind of quell our excitement until everything gets released in September, around September 15th. Libby, did that change at all? Still right around September 15th. The other thing that happened recently is we received the AP and IB scores, and it appears again that those scores went up. And I want to say that many school districts charge the students pay to take the test, and if you pay to take the test, and mom and dad are footing the bill, you could rest assured that when the kids are taking the test, sometimes, you know, they may work a little bit harder because they paid for it. Now, we don't do that. We pay for students to take the test, and we have seen from time to time students almost giving up sometimes or saying, well, I don't have to pay for it anyway. So that's the decision down the line to see if maybe we have some type of charge for students, and or say that kids you're able to take it, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. But we really want to expose students to that experience because we feel that prepares them. So with that, we have, again, we've seen many other areas. If you score a 3 or above, typically you get college credit. And so we saw multiple of our areas with AP that averaged over 3. We did see a couple that were right around 3, and we saw a couple that were too low for us. And so just a quick, you guys all understand averages. So if there's 5 people taking an AP test, one gets a 5, one gets a 4, one gets a 3, one gets a 2, one gets a 1, that averages a 3. To get a 5 is tough to do in AP. But to get a 1 is not as tough as it is to get a 5. So if you have 5 people taking a test, or if you have 4 people taking a test, and you have a 4, you have a 3, you have a 2, and a 1, when you do the math, you'll be below a 3, even though 2 of them met the standard and 2 did not meet the standard. So you'll see when the results come out where they are. Libby Style has done a great job to make sure of analyzing the data with Michelle Ritzy, who does a phenomenal job with our AP and IB students. And so you'll get all that data again before the end of this month. Now that is hard data that has already been scrubbed. So when you get that, you'll be able to see exactly where we went. But this is, in my opinion, this is something that the board really should have a conversation about in terms of whether we continue to pay for that. It is great. There is something to be said for that as well. But we also know that some kids going into it, we know right away that where they're gonna fall because of the work that's been done, also because of the alignment of standards, and so we know that going in. But the teachers have worked very hard. We feel they've done a great job. And again, not perfect or whatever. We have room to grow, but you will see growth and you will see achievement in these results. And I credit the teachers, the administrators, Ms. Ritzy, Libby Stiles, Tanya West-Wright for that, because there had been a dogged effort to make sure that we prepare our students for this examination, which ultimately leads kids toward college credit. But also, it's not just that. It's also being prepared for the next step, whether or not they choose college or not. But these high-stake exams mean something, and I think it helps kids. And then with the IB, you'll get those results as well. We've not dug down deep into that to do averages and all that stuff, but you'll receive all that data as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Treasurer's Report.
2 quick items. We're approaching the end of the closing of fiscal year 23. That will happen either tomorrow or Wednesday. And everyone is very pleased about the funding formula passing phases 3 and 4. I think we, schools in the funding formula got what we wanted. We are using the 2022 rates for teachers and all the core items. And of course the phase-in for now will be up to, we'll get the 4 of the 6 years of the phase-in complete in this next biennium. So that's all very good news.
That's good.
I am looking very much forward to seeing our final numbers. I'm a little concerned about the preliminary numbers because I believe some of our enrollment numbers might look a little different since we won't be using probably the 3-year average anymore because our top enrollment year will fall off. That's the last pre-pandemic year of enrollment, so we did see some loss of students through the pandemic. So that, stay tuned. Also, our valuation is definitely going to increase. Everyone's is in the state, so we're not unique there. That, of course, as we get richer locally, does reduce the amount of state funding we receive. So those are just some things we look forward to seeing how this really truly does impact Princeton. And you know, it takes them a while to get those numbers all phased in, and they'll phase them in groups, and eventually, I would assume by October, November, we'll have the full picture of what our next biennial school funding budgets look like.
That's good news.
It's very good news. Great for the state of Ohio, all public school children. That's all I have.
Were you going to say something, Gina?
Oh, I just said it was good news.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then next is Superintendent's Report.
Well, Ms. Petter, I will not beat that record, but I do have a comment about the funding formula, and I just want to go on record as my last public meeting here as superintendent. It's not enough. It's still not enough. We are happy with the fight, but it took way, way, way too long. There's a massive amount that's going to charter schools. And so all taxpayers in the state of Ohio need to realize that this state was funded, our country was funded on principles of freedom of choice. So in that respect, we understand someone's choice to choose to go to private, parochial, or charter school. We understand that. But every single charter school in the state of Ohio is getting more per pupil than Princeton. Every public or parochial and private, I believe, are as well. When you see the increase that we have, it's beautiful. That's great. Yeah, we need more money. The full phase out, when you look at the initial formula, had us right around $9 or $10 million. The very first one that came out. Now we're not close to that. And while we do appreciate the hard work by the many people, the legislators and the advocates and the lobbyists and the school board members and so forth that have done so much work, and superintendents and treasurers and so forth, the reality is until there is true equity when it comes to funding, then we can't stop the fight. And I've talked just about every single week for the last couple of years with legislators around the state of Ohio to advocate for fair funding, to advocate for equitable practices throughout the state of Ohio when it comes to curriculum, instruction, so forth. And there's one unfunded mandate after unfunded mandate, which do not apply, believe it or not, to the private parochial or, depending upon the situation, certain charters. Now, Chris Petter has been relentless in her belief and positivity when it comes to what was going to happen, but has done the right thing by not putting that in the 5-year forecast. You can't do that. That's how school districts go bankrupt. So I think that's going to help the bottom line in and of itself, but there's other funding aspects that haven't been taken into account, as great as it should be. Some of our English learners, some of the specific programs, when you look at dyslexia training and so forth, and the wear and tear, and even though they've done some work to modify that, the reality is until we could stop the unfunded mandates for public schools, until we could have more flexibility, we can't rest. Period on that one. New paragraph. Some really cool positive stuff coming up. We're going to be recognized at the Reds game this Friday. Oh, yeah. Yes, yep. So we're excited about that. Princeton and 3 other school districts will be on the field. Some of our students will be on the field, which would be marvelous. We're really excited about that. Just got that news about 2 o'clock, huh, Mrs. Roddy? So that'll be fantastic. Wanted to talk a little bit about the parade that we were able to participate in, Sharonville. They kind of brought that back. That was great. But it's not just the 4th of July parade that I want to talk about. I also want to talk about the Lincoln Heights parade, which is going to come up in Labor Day, as well as Memorial Day, the great parade that happens in Glendale, and the different community celebrations which happen in Springdale, and the different events over and over, the chili cook-off, I always call it, but it's really Chili Fest down at Evendale, and the Woodlawn Beautiful celebration that happened over Memorial Day weekend as well. And the communities that we serve are really, really fortunate to be in a place where the communities talk to each other and appreciate each other. And it was really obvious to me 4th of July when I'm on this float or in the back of a pickup truck, which I thought was kind of interesting. But going around and seeing that, saw so many residents of the other communities. And even though there was a Conquer the Hill event, running event, walking event in Evendale, I believe Jody Kessler, one of our board members, finished first in that. That was excellent. Is that true, Ms. Kessler? You finished first for every single person named Jody Kessler? No. You finished second to another person named Jody Kessler. Okay. But those events are critical, so I just want to encourage the board to always support all those events as much as they can. Our summer school ended tremendously. We had great turnout, and again, the principals, the teachers worked wonderfully together to maximize learning opportunities for our students. And I wanted to kind of end with 2 things. One, with transition. So Elgin Card has been everywhere. Really, he's done a wonderful job in learning. He's met, I believe, with all the cabinet members already. He's been out. I've introduced him to multiple people. I have great confidence that the transition that people will see and feel that it has been very smooth. We have a couple other days scheduled together, and those are going to be long days because there's a lot of different things to talk about, all the way from the CCIP to some instructional methodologies that we really want to make sure that that's core to who we are. And that doesn't mean that's the way that Elgin's going to always see things, and that's the beauty of it, right? So he's going to come in, and I know he's going to kind of take in, but he's also going to give, and that's what we want in any leader. So he will do great things here. I'm really excited about what he's done and already the individual connections he's made. I did want to say this too, that to the Board of Education, that the strength of this district in part lies with what you guys are bringing each and every day, and how you connect with the superintendent and the treasurer, and how they connect with their team, and so on and so on and so on. And I talked about this, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when I gave everybody a pen. I'm going to give you another one, and it's the story of the Redwoods, because it's so apropos to what we've been able to accomplish in this district. When we go from 535 to number 11 in student growth, and I go around and that's a talking point. It's a beautiful talking point to which people say, well, what about achievement? You know, there's always something, right? But yet, when you look at how far we've come in achievement, well, we're getting there. We're not where we want to be, of course. When you look at districts like ours, we're outperforming everybody. And I believe it's because of this Redwood mentality. There is not one person that stands above everybody. We stand together. And because we understand that what we do each and every day, the culture of Princeton, is really like the culture of this beautiful giant redwood forest. When you think of these winds coming off the Pacific, they certainly would decimate all those trees. They certainly would, but they don't. You don't see these big, tall, strong trees that get knocked over, and people mistakenly over and over think it's because of this deep root structure, but that's not the case. The case is redwoods have a very narrow root structure, but they have a long root structure, and they intertwine with another redwood and another redwood and another redwood, and that's what makes it strong. And actually it was interesting because I wanted to remind myself of this one point in the story that I knew existed, but it didn't. I was like, I know it's there, but it wasn't. But it's a true story, though. One of the interesting pieces about redwoods is that actually the root structure supports other plants, other trees. The root structure does it. And that it actually allows other roots from trees and plants to intertwine. That is public education. That is public education. And if this whole auditorium was filled and everybody heard me speak 1,000 times, I would say, somebody scream out, how many times have I said it's bigger than Princeton? Now, all the taxpayers in Princeton may think, well, just focus on Princeton, Tom. But it's bigger than Princeton, just like the Redwoods. It's not about one, it's about the many. And it has been my honor to serve the beautiful kids in this district. I just saw one the other day, came running up to me, said, hey, Mr. Burton, how's your summer going? And that's the beauty of this district. The kids care enough to know who's in the district. That doesn't always happen. So I just want to thank the Board of Education and thank the community as my last televised event. So for the community, the beautiful community, the tapestry of diversity that brought myself, my beautiful wife, and 3 kids down here to Princeton, thank you for everything. And if I could, I'd give one to this whole community, because the strength of the community is the school, and the strength of the school is the community. Thank you, and that concludes my report, and I'm going to pass these down So you each have one. There you go. Wear that with pride, and remember that this district is in great shape with unbelievable people inside the district that are going to work hard for our kids each and every day, and that's what you want. And I plan to vote for each and every levy. If we have another one coming up or not, I'm going to vote for it anyway. Thank you.
No, thank you.
May I add something? Madam Chair?
Sure.
I just want to thank you for your hard work and dedication. You're probably the best storyteller I've ever known. And when it comes to teaching, I remember some of my favorite teachers were people who could tell a story and make it come to life for you, almost like it was a movie. So you've got that skill, and I know you'll do well with that, and you will truly be missed. And this might be your last televised meeting, but you got one more meeting.
July 24th, let's go.
That's right, all right. And I wanted to add one more thing, two more things. August 8th is Election Day, so I just hope people remember that's one of those summer election days, and a lot of people might forget about it because they're on vacation or something like that. And I wanted to add, last thing, this is the last thing. As a local historian and author, I was featured in Cincinnati Magazine and on Channel 5, Channel 9, and the Cincinnati Herald for the unveiling of a historical marker at the Mann's Hotel, which was one of the few hotels where African Americans could stay during the 1930s and 40s. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, of course. Tom, I don't even know what to say other than you will be truly missed. Thank you so much for everything that you brought to this district. Your energy, your passion, your playfulness, everything that you've brought just has made us better. And so you will be missed. However, I do know where you live, so I will be knocking on the door from time to time. And thank you so much for the pen as well and the story about the redwood. And I would agree, you are an amazing storyteller. And I can't wait to see what happens next. So, but thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you. And again, can't wait to see what happens next.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I will. I would just want to thank you for your dedication to the district. You work 24/7, 7 days a week, sometimes more hours than are even in a day or days that are in a week. I've never seen anyone work as hard as you. I appreciate that, and I know the communities do too. So you've been a top-notch superintendent. It's going to be a hard act to follow.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a little bit to say, and that is thank you for resetting the markers of what makes Princeton, Princeton. Prior to your tenure, we've had people that try to shift our definition based on what was popular. But I think you went back to the roots, which was getting into the neighborhoods, all of them, on the ground, shaking hands. I don't know about kissing babies, but shaking hands.
Oh, he kissed babies.
And
He kissed a few babies.
and just finding out what it is that made Princeton great originally and bringing that formula into the modern times. And it takes a unique individual to be able to do that, because that certainly hadn't happened in 20-some years prior to your ascension. So personally, I appreciate it because I have kids in the school, and I can see the difference between when my oldest graduated, some declination, and now we're back on the rise. People are fighting literally sometimes to get into Princeton. That was not the case prior to Tom coming on board. Thank you.
And as we have our board meetings up at the other building, I look at the pictures of superintendents on the wall, and I'm the oldest one, so I have known them all. And let me tell you, you are in a class by yourself. So if I were in charge, I'd get you a much bigger picture so that I could enjoy it during board meetings.
Maybe we can have those photos displayed here, too. Maybe we could put those photos here as well.
Maybe we could.
Susan, I'm not as old as you, but
Well, few people are.
I've interacted with all of them from the beginning as a student until current day.
Well, I have known them all. I even taught Dr. Robert A. Lucas's grandchildren.
Oh, I thought you said it was Robbie Lucas himself.
Not himself.
Well, that could have been too. I'm just,
Mrs. Wider, I know we're getting ready to adjourn, but I just wanted to just emphasize one more time, that is the strength of the team. It has been and will always be. And our team, our administrative team, our teachers team, support staff team, they're so strong that it actually, leading a district, it becomes easier because of the strength of the team. So I want to thank any of those and all of those for the great work, and especially the people who are giving up their beautiful night to be here. So thank to each and every one of you. Thank you.
and do we need an executive session? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Then I'll move we go into executive session.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded.
Do you need to state the reasons?
Yeah.
Do you need to state the reasons?
Got to put your peepers on and read what it says.
To discuss under sections 121.22 G2 of the Ohio Revised Code.
Second.
Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wider?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Will there be any action afterwards? If not, then yes.
They know.
Well, we do have one little item of business.
Do we,
Board, when we come back.
do we want to handle it now?
We're out now.
Well, let's go back there.